In this video, we're going to be adding fractions with unlike denominators. For any fractions, we have these numerators at the top and our denominators at the bottom. However, whenever we want to add, we have to make sure that the numbers at the bottom, the denominators, are the same. And in this case, they're not. We have 4 and we have 3. A fraction has two components, the numerators, which are at top, and the denominators that are at bottom. So whenever we want to add fractions together, we have to make sure that the denominators, these numbers at the bottom, are the same. And we can tell that 4 and 3 are not the same value, so we have to figure out a way to make those the same value. And what we do is we actually multiply top and bottom of each one of these fractions by a number on each one so that we can get the same value. So we know a common term between 4 and 3 would be 12, meaning that if we multiply this value by 3 on top and bottom, what we end up getting is 3 over 12, right? 1 times 3 is 3, 4 times 3 is 12. And if we do the same thing, but this time multiply it by 4, we get 3 times 4, which will be 12 on the bottom, and 2 times 4, which is 8. Now if you check, we actually have now a denominator that is the same, which is 12. So now all we need to do is just add these two values that are at the top, the numerators, together. So 3 plus 8 is equal to 11. So our answer is 11 over 12. Moving on to the question on the right here, you notice that we have 5 and 3 for our denominators, which are not the same value. Now we need to multiply to get a value where we have the same denominator. Now an easy trick that you can always do is just multiply the opposite of the values that you have here. Since we have a 5 here, we'll just multiply it by 3, top and bottom. And we always have to make sure that we are multiplying the same fraction, this first fraction here, by the same value. You cannot do another value. So if we multiply this by 3, we have to multiply this by 3 on top. So if we do that, 3 times 3 is 9, and the number at the bottom is 15. Now we have a 3 here, so let's just multiply by the number that's the opposite fraction, which is 5. And if we do that, what we'll end up getting is 5 at the top and 15 at the bottom. Now we have the same denominator, which is 15. And if that's the case, all we have to do is just add the two numerators together. So 9 plus 5 is going to equal to 14. So adding this one over here, we notice that we have 4 and we have 8. Now we can do that same trick. We can multiply this by 4 and we can multiply this by 8. However, that is one way to do it, but we can actually do it in a simpler fashion. We know that 4 times 2 would be the same as 8. So all we need to do is just multiply this one fraction here on the left. And if we do that, we get 2 at the top, and 4 times 2 is 8 at the bottom. So now they both have the same denominator, right? The number on the bottom is the same, and if that's the case, we can just add the two values at the top. So 2 plus 1 is equal to 3. Moving on to the question here on the right, see, we could just multiply this by 4 and this by 6 to get that value. However, we could also multiply this by 2 and this value by 3. So we want to try to figure out a denominator that is not too big, but that there's a common factor in between them. So we know that 6 can go to 12. We know that 4 can also have a value of 12 if we multiply it by certain numbers. So if we multiply this one, we get 2 over 12 plus 3 over 12. Now we have the same denominator on the bottom, so all we need to do is just add the values at top, which is going to be 5 over 12. Now looking at this one, again, we notice that we have 14 and 7 as the denominators. Well, I know that if I multiply this by 2 on the bottom, that will give me 14. So we'll multiply both top and bottom by 14. And if we do, we'll have 5 over 14 for that first fraction. And then we'll have 6 over 14 for the second fraction. And that gives us 11 over 14. Now moving on to this one over here, we have a 12 and we have a 72. Sometimes when we take a look at these fractions, we might have to do a little bit of guesswork to figure out what we need to do. Well, I know that 6 times 12 will give me 72. So all we need to do is just multiply this by 6 on top and bottom. Now, of course, you could multiply this by 12 and you could multiply this by 72 if you wanted to, and you will get an answer. You'll just have to do a little bit of work to simplify that out. So we always suggest that you take the time to actually just sit there for a second and try to figure out what might give you the easiest way to get an answer. So if we multiply this by 6 on top, we're going to get 30 over 72, and then we could add a 7 here. And if we do that, now we have the same denominator, So we can add just the two numbers at the top, which would be 37.